right screen.
Yeah, but if you could go into screen show mode, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we
Is
go.
that better?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, but
All right. So, quick overview will provide the results of the stormwater rate assessment. Some of the discussion points will give a little background on stormwater. Malcolm, feel free to correct me as we go through that. Provide that purpose of the rate adjustment again, the rate basis and our policy recommendations, a timeline for moving forward with this rate assessment, and then request some feedback from the commission. So we came up with this slide. This is just really hoping to show some of the change in level of service from the stormwater section through time. So the stormwater section was created in 2003 as a relatively small group within community development, really focused on FEMA floodplain management, development review, construction inspections, a little bit of maintenance funding, and some water quality aspects. In 2005, we had our first rate change and our first credit manual, and added some funding for capital improvements, so drainage improvements, DRIP at the time, as well as the drainage investigations that would go into updating that list of needed drainage improvements. 2007 is when we really started doing some master planning. That was the beginning of the NEMAD studies. Actually, that's redundant there. Beginning of NEMADs, the Northeast Area Master Drainage Study. 2009 is really when the flood alert network, which is the rain gauges and stream gauges, really started growing. We had one or two before then, one at Peakview Street, that was the earliest, but we really started growing that rain gauge network. Also the LID ordinance, so the low impact development. 2012 is when the voters approved the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, which was mostly, almost entirely done in the fire department. But that did mean that there was more of an overlap with stormwater, with larger watershed management, both Dry Lake Hills and also down Lake Mary area. 2018, the Rio de Flag Flood Control Project was finally fully approved, which led to a new rate that went into effect in 2019. That rate mostly covered the debt servicing for the city side of the Army Corps project. 2019 is when we had the museum fire, also the climate action adaptation plan, and real funding for that Rio de Flag project. So quite a few new things that were dropped into the stormwater section. Also, maintenance operations was moved out of public works and into water services under stormwater, which required quite a bit more in terms of asset management and GIS servicing. 2021 was obviously a big year for flooding, which led to the stormwater section taking over quite a bit of flood control responsibilities in terms of regional flood management. And then obviously this year with the pipeline fire was when we really start talking more about the individual direct assistance, which goes into that flood proofing. And then a big item, which we'll be talking about today, we're really starting to get into the business of regional detention basins, which is a great thing. It's really good to see. But with the development of regional detention basins, there's quite a bit of maintenance that goes into those, especially ones that are impacted by the post-fire environment. So we're talking about quite a bit in terms of sediment and debris removal. So kind of summarizing that quickly, the utility structure for Flagstaff, for the stormwater section, is quite complex. There's just a list of many of the duties that fall within stormwater section, going from what is fairly common to see nationwide. So NPDS, MS4 is very common, outreach and education, drainage development review, construction inspections, etc. And then we get to things that are a little less common that you normally see in other sections, divisions, or other government agencies. And that would be the regional studies, regional flood management, post-fire response, regional watershed management, things like forest thinning, water supply management. And something that's really being stressed quite a bit from the FEMA side lately, which is natural beneficial floodplains, what they call natural beneficial floodplains, which we already are ahead of the times with our rural floodplain ordinance. There's a great little study that's put out by Western Kentucky University, Campbell and Bradshaw last year, and this is one snapshot from that study, and it gives some of the stormwater utility fees nationwide. So stormwater at a nationwide level is pretty rarely a utility on its own. There's about 2,500 stormwater utilities out there, which sounds like a lot. But when you consider the fact that you have over 20,000 NFIP communities, so National Flood Insurance Policy communities, we're talking about only 10% of the communities have a stormwater utility. Many of them, the stormwater section is wrapped into either engineering, public works, or some other funding structure. But what we're looking at here is the funding for stormwater utilities, so where they have their own utility rate. The larger the circle, the larger the rate, the smaller the circle, the smaller the rate. The majority of these stormwater utilities are based on the ERU system, which we are as well. So that's the equivalent rate unit based off of impervious surfaces. So as you can see, some areas have a much higher stormwater utility rate than we do at an ERU level. So some of the reasons for this rate adjustment, obviously we've had an increased amount of fire and fire severity in the area and the number of flood events, both in the fire area and outside of it. So from climate change as well, we're seeing some of those more rare flood or rain events happening more frequently. So that's making our current infrastructure insufficient throughout most of the city. Also a very large increase in demand on our operations, both staffing and equipment. We spent over $1 million this year just on flood response. Last year was also a big year. And that was just in the pipeline fire area this year and the museum fire area last year. Mitigation costs for the new flood areas such as Spruce Wash and Shoals Creeks are, as I mentioned, very high. And then we have still some deferred CIP projects from that 2010. That's when it finished, NEMADS. So it started in 2007, ended in 2010. The majority of those projects are still unfunded, just due to the increase in costs and increase in needs that we have throughout the community. So the completion of these critical capital projects will reduce our flood response operation costs, and that's really what we're shooting for. We're hoping to design our way out of responding every year in terms of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of response. So take that response off the table, replace it with appropriate capital improvement projects, and hope that we can move on from there. So our current rates, that's at $3.74 per ERU. Gives us limited capital funding, roughly $600,000 a year. We also have a large increase in our operating costs, both from flood mitigation, flood response. What's missing in this bullet is the new detention basins. And currently, this is all essentially unfunded, and it is a rather unsustainable budget. Sanjay will be going into a really nice slide about that later. Should say not a very illustrative slide, put it that way. Our proposed rates will increase that capital funding to allow for some permanent flood mitigation. We are looking at both scenarios here. So a scenario where the general obligation bond that we are going out to voters with in November is funded, and a scenario where that bond measure is not funded. So we're looking at both scenarios on that one, and it will allow for funding some of the increased operation costs that we're talking about. So the detention basins, as I mentioned, pre-season flood mitigation, so some of the sandbags, barriers, direct assistance, more staffing and equipment for what we need to do, and then more master planning. To be honest, since 2010, we have not had the funding to do more master planning, and that is needed to understand our long-term issues. So it will provide a more sustainable budget. Okay, so right here we have the purpose of the rate adjustment in terms of capital proposals. So this is our 7-year horizon. So you can see a few line items. We kind of bundled them by type. So we have the Rio to Flag flood control project as the top line item. You can see a lot of that is actually debt servicing in the next several years. Our spot improvements, so these are spot drainage improvements. So pretty heavy this year, and then it kind of tails off. Post-fire projects, both in the museum area and the pipeline area, and then other capital improvement projects as identified under NEMADS or similar smaller studies. So basically deferred capital improvement projects that we know of that we have not been able to get to due to lack of funding. So here's a map of those bundles. You can kind of see that they're spread throughout the city. The green dots are the areas either under NEMADS or other areas that we know of that we had deferred capital improvements. The pink dots are the museum fire. As you can see, most of those are along the main stem of Spruce Wash. We have 2 yellow dots for general bundled areas for the pipeline fire. And then also some Rio flag points, mostly in the downtown area. All right. Sanjay, are you taking this one or am I taking it? I can finish this off if you want.
I thought you were going to take it.
I'll take it. All right. Sorry about that. So yeah, again, to talk about that rate basis, we are on an ERU system. That is the most common stormwater utility type system out there. So that's based on equivalent rate units. Here in Flagstaff, 1 ERU is equivalent to 1,500 square feet per impervious area. So we do actually have to determine our impervious area, which we do roughly every 3 years. I wish it was every 3. It usually extends a little beyond that. And we'll do that through aerial survey. So LiDAR, light detection and ranging survey, as well as ortho imagery. And then we will take that and we will determine the amount of impervious surface that we have in GIS, and then give that over to customer service to update our ERU population. Right now, our residential properties have a maximum of 5 ERUs. The average residential property has roughly about 3 ERUs, and commercial properties do not have a maximum. We do propose through this rate adjustment to make an update to the policy, so change the maximum of 5 ERUs for residential properties up to 10, and we can do that through this rate adjustment process. And the purpose of that is to be more equitable to the rest of the residents, to not artificially cap it so low that there's a portion of the population that are being under taxed, if you will. Okay.
Thank you, Ed. So now I'll take over the presentation and talk about the financial plan. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me clearly. Ed, can you hear me?
Yep, sound great.
All right, thank you. So the operating cost is increasing substantially by $2.2 million in 2024 next year. And the main challenge is the detention basin. It's that additional cost that's needed. As Ed mentioned, we're hoping that by doing this aggressive program, we can defer some of this future costs. And we also have capital expenditure that's occurring over the next years to deal with all the fires that we've had in the last few years. And over the next 7 years, that's $12.7 million. So a mixture of different types of sources of revenues are being used to fund these capital projects. The first is revenue bonds, second is geo bonds, grants, and then rates cash. Now, one of the big unknowns, or one of the things we're hoping for, is the November election, the geo bonds to be voted. If the voters approve that, it's $26 million worth of these projects will be funded by property. If they're not, then those projects still need to go forward, except that they will be funded by stormwater fees. And I'll be showing you both of those scenarios. Next slide, please, Ed. So these two tables here shows us the anticipated expenditure level. The top one shows us the operating budget. The first line is what you consider the traditional O&M budget that we've had at 1.8. There are some one-time costs this year, and then it drops to 1.4. But we have additional needs that's needed, different levels of services that are needed because of the fire detention basin being one of the most significant one, and that's in that additional O&M. So this additional O&M cost covers personnel, capital, pre-season flood mitigation, as mentioned, and of course the detention basin. Ed talked about the different capital needs out there, and then this shows us the mix of funding. How much of it's going to be rate funded, how much of it's going to be revenue bonds, how much of it's going to be grant funded, and how much of it's going to be geo bonds. The geo bonds, as I mentioned, that's $26 million in total. That we're hoping for would be, the voters would approve that, and that would be on the property roll. If not, then that $26 million of geo bond would be then a rate revenue. and then the stormwater fee would pay for it. So now I showed you this graph last time we met, and let's just go over it again. The bars are the different revenue streams coming into play. So the orange one is what the revenues from stormwater fee, roughly $4.4 million. We have a little bit of grant money in 23, 24. That's that blue color. We don't know what the future is with grants after that, so we're anticipating no grants. If we do get grants, that helps us, of course, and eases the pressure, but we don't know if we will receive that. In addition, you see that darker orange color or brown color starting 24 onward. That's the GEO bond revenue coming in if the voters approve it. So we take that into account. So those are all the different revenues. And then the shaded colors in the back are all the expenditures. The first one is the operating revenue that we have. Then we have the current debt. Then we have the proposed debt, because I mentioned we are issuing quite a bit of debt to fund these projects. And then we have the capital expenditure, the teal color. The lines now are the ending balance. The black line is the ending balance and showing it's a negative slope, which is not good from a financial perspective. That means we're drawing into our reserves. And as you can see, it goes below zero in 2026. The dotted red lines is the target that we want to achieve. We are on the reserves. The reserves are based on two policies. One is a 25% of revenue, which you currently have. We are recommending to have an emergency reserve and build that up to $2 million in the out years. That won't start in the beginning years. That's more in 27. But just in case if something happens, we have some money in the bank to deal with an emergency. So as next slide. So as you can see, the current revenues are not sufficient to deal with the flood situation that we're having and the stormwater needs. Significant rate increases will be needed to deal with that. And as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at two scenarios: one where the GEO bonds are approved, so then the capital, some of the capital, 26 million, is funded by property tax, and the other one where it's not approved, and that means all those projects have to be rate funded. So the next slide now shows the actual proposed rates. We worked with staff. We went over many different scenarios associated with that. And these are showing you the ERU rate. So the current rate is $3.74. That's what the current is. And then it shows you what each rate would be starting in January. So in January 23, if the voters approve the GEO bonds, then this proposal would be $6.55. If the voters do not approve it, then that means we need to fund that through stormwater. That'll be $8.42. You can see the fees out in the out years. It does jump quite a bit in the first 2 years, and that's because we're funding all this operating costs, all this capital project. So it has to ramp up quite a bit. Then in the out years, it sort of stabilizes and it sort of smooths out. You can really see that in the increase, the next part of this table, where you see the $2.81, the difference between the current and the proposed, or the $4.68. And then you can see in the out years that it's more manageable in the sense of it's 35 cents or 30 cents of an increase.
And Sanjay, that's a monthly rate?
That's a monthly rate, correct. And I will be showing you customer impacts towards the end of the presentation, but this is just one ERUs as discussed, or maybe not mentioned. 3 ERUs is the standard for a single family. So now we're going to show you the financial picture of this. So this is with the GEO bonds approved. If you notice that one of the things you'll notice, that black line now is not negative sloped. It's sort of hovering above the red. And then in 2029, that's where I started to look at it, 2028, is I want that black line and the red line to be parallel to each other, and the black line ideally slightly above the red line. And that's what we achieve. So we get to a quote unquote steady state in some sense, where revenues and expenses are equalizing and we're maintaining a reserve balance that's healthy, and we can deal with unanticipated things that may occur. Unfortunately, one of the things I think we all realize now is the unexpected will occur. We don't know what that is, of course, because it's unexpected, but something will happen in this next 6 years. We know that. And so by having these healthy reserves, by dealing with this, we can deal with that, whatever the next thing is. Hopefully it's not a fire, but if it's a fire, whatever it is, we can be prepared financially to deal with it and address it quickly. Next slide, please. So now this is if the voters do not approve it. One thing you'll notice quickly is that the stormwater, the geo bond is not there anymore. Now it's all stormwater revenues. And you also notice that the orange bars are much more higher now because we're absorbing it through the stormwater fee. And again, I'm trying to get to that steady state in 2029 where the black line and the red dotted lines are parallel to each other. When doing large projects, we need to have the money on hand to award the contracts, and that's why sometimes the reserves are a little bit high and then they drop down and they move around a little. Next slide, please. So now, we've talked about the financial challenges, proposed rates, the financial condition, of course. What does this mean to our customers and in the community? So this is a residential, and as mentioned, this is 3 ERUs. That's the standard or typical one. We have the current, we have the proposed, we have the monthly, and then we have the annual. So in scenario 1, with the geo bond approved, it would be $8.42 a month increase. Scenario 2, without the geo bonds, it'll be $14, and then you can see the annual change too. Next slide, please. So the next slide shows the commercial average big box. These are these very large Walmarts, those establishments, and they have 220 ERUs. So you can see that the current $822. With the proposed, it would go up to $1,439 under scenario 1, or $1,815, and then you can see the monthly increase associated with them. Remember, these are large volumes of revenues that are coming into these places, and hopefully profit too, but in the sense of their business. But these are the costs associated with the commercial ERUs. We also have the restaurant. The restaurant average is 14. You have the current at $52.36, and then the proposed, and then the monthly change there too, of $39.27 for scenario 1 and $65.45 for the monthly.
So Sanjay, these are changes that are net relative to ERU, yet if the bond does go through, you're still making a bond payment, right?
Yes.
As a citizen.
Correct. So that is correct.
And so which is the relative cheaper way to do this then?
From a financial perspective, it doesn't matter, right? If you do a geo bond or you don't do a geo bond, right? Because it's still getting paid. It's not one or cheaper. From a customer impact perspective, the older established households, the people who've been, I'm thinking through this, and maybe Rick, you may be able to help me out here, because the property value would be assessed. It would be assessed on property value, and in the property value, it's a question of the correlation between property value and ERUs. And I think those are positively correlated. I would think they are. So more value your house is.
Well, I think space is space, right? 3 ERUs doesn't matter what your house costs, but the question is how much bond gets associated with those. Anyway, it's worth a question, or it's worth a quick look, maybe down the road, not today, to kind of figure out, because customer impact, at the end of the day, you got to pay that 12.3 at the top.
Right.
And it's either going to be you pay it direct or you pay it through that and a bond, right? I mean, that's, okay.
Yeah, either way you're paying it. It's just that 3R, if you're a wealthier house or a nicer house, you may pay more of that geo bond, even though it's a
Gotcha.
So that's where I was going with my thought process. So it would put more of the burden on more expensive real estate than the less expensive. Next slide. So now, what's the survey of this? And so what we've done here is we've normalized it to 1,000. You do charge your ERUs is 1,500, but because of all the different agencies out there, they all charge it slightly. We normalized it to 1,000. You'll notice if we go all the way to the left and work our way, you'll see Flagstaff. That's your current. You're one of the lowest, as you can see. And then with the proposed, that's S1 and S2 with the highlighted. Those are the 2 different scenarios, so you'll be more in the middle. One of the things, as Ed mentioned, is that stormwater, the level of service, the requirements varies with communities. Some communities focus more on water quality issues, some more flood, and such as yours. So it's a little bit all over. So the ones that are more expensive tend to focus more on water quality issues. I think I'm turning it over back to Ed now for the next slide.
I got a little question on that last slide.
Yeah.
How come there's 2 Flagstaff entry?
Yeah, so there's 2 slides those are the 2 scenarios with the
there
geobonds.
is? Oh, is there 2 of everything there?
No, it's just, so there's the current. You see how if you work your way left,
Yeah.
maybe Ed, you can use your mouse to point for me, or it says Flagstaff current. That's your current ERU, current 1000. And then you have the Flagstaff S1, which that's scenario 1 with the geo bonds approved. So the $26 million is on the property roll. And then S2 is where the stormwater pays for it, so it's more expensive.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. So moving forward, what is our timeline here? So we did go with our notice of intent back in August. We're having that rate analysis report right now, as well as the Water Commission meeting for that report. The documents will be posted on the Water Services website tomorrow, and that will begin our 16-day public notice. We will have community outreach to a number of different groups in September and October. Copy to city clerk will go in a month from now, so October 15th. We'll then have our council work session on October 25th with a newspaper notice the next day. Our first public read will be on the November 15th council meeting. Our second read and the ordinance will be on November 29th, so after the elections. And then we will have a rate effective January 1st. So just going over that a little bit more. So the newspaper will be a public hearing notice. We will have a website for that rate adjustment. We're going to have to create that, which will include the rate analysis report, FAQs, and the e-newsletter. We will have both a virtual and in-person open house. And then we'll have a number of road shows like we are doing for the bond right now to different local organizations. And with that, do we have any questions?
John here. I have a question about ERUs for residential, and how could you go back to that slide and redefine that for me again?
Sure. Which slide were you thinking of? This one?
Yeah, I think that was it right there.
Okay. So what clarification would you like?
Well, I'm just the more ERUs, the more you pay, or is it a set? How is that? I'm sorry, I'm getting educated. This is new stuff for me. So
No worries. So how it is we have the impervious surface unit or impervious surface layer that's created in GIS. We then parse out by parcel the amount of impervious surface that each of those parcels has, and then we can do a quick conversion by unit type. So let's say you had 3,200 square feet of impervious surface. Well, that would be, rounding down, that would be 2 ERUs. If we had something closer to 4,200 square feet, that would probably be rounded up to 3 ERUs. And then you'd pay per ERU. So right now we're paying $3.74 per ERU. So if you had those 3 ERUs, which is our most typical size house, then you'd be paying 3 times $3.74, so about $11 per bill on that municipal bill. So that's where we are right now. And we have roughly 100,000 ERUs out there in the population. I don't know the exact number; it fluctuates, but I could talk to customer service and determine that.
And currently there's a cap for residential properties of 3 ERUs?
No, currently there's a cap of 5. And the majority of residential properties are 5 and under. There are, as you expect, it's kind of a exponential drop. So there's a handful of sixes. I'd have to pull it up. I think there's a couple hundred properties that have six, and then there's maybe 50 that have seven, and then it goes down very quickly, 8, 9, 10, and then there's a handful that are over 10. But by handful, I mean literally maybe two handfuls. We're talking just a few very, very large properties. So essentially, the majority of residential properties are 5 and below, though we do have some 6, 7s, and 8s. As well as obviously 9, 10s and on up. So our purpose in raising that ERU limit is to be a little more consistent with what we're seeing nationwide. Most stormwater utilities do have an ERU cap. Most of them are roughly around that 10 limit. If you are talking about 1,500 square feet, again, you have to normalize it. Some communities have a smaller unit, they're talking 1,000 or 500 square feet per ERU, and some have much larger. But if you were to normalize it, most of them have a cutoff of around 10,000 to 15,000 square feet of impervious surface, and above that, you're flat rated, if that makes sense.
Okay, I would support raising that cap to 10 for sure. And you determine the impervious area using radar, or
yeah. So
that would be like the roof, any cement or asphalt on the property, basically, would go into that square footage amount, right?
Correct. So it'd be a roof, any accessory dwelling units, accessory sheds, so any rooftops. Yeah, if you have a patio, deck, sidewalk, driveway, those are the majority of your improvements. When we can, and usually we can, since we're hand checking these, if there's a trampoline or if there's a car that's parked off into the grass because you got home too late or whatever, we don't count that. So we really try to determine what's a permanent impervious surface versus what has just temporarily been thrown up that we just happen to capture on that flight.
Okay. And is that reflected on a residential bill?
It is. So there is a line item on your municipal bill for the stormwater fee.
Okay. But it does, and that's based upon the ERU then.
It's based on the ERU. I haven't gotten a paper bill in years. I get it digitally personally. I have to check. I don't believe we actually state the number of ERUs on that bill. I think it's just a stormwater line item with the number that goes with that.
Okay, but that's the basis for that fee. So.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Hey, thank you much.
Any other questions for Ed? I got a couple. We'll go ahead. Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Malcolm. It's just an observation for Ed and Sanjay. The bond thing was in the newspaper the other day. It was just kind of a line item, and I saw stormwater and I saw sewer, so on. I was trying to think about it from the perspective of a community member, a citizen of the community, and whether or not I'm going to vote for this. And of course, you have, my full support. But I'm thinking that you need to come up with a specific list of what you're going to do with the money. Now, I know that there's increases in maintenance and staff and that kind of thing. But if you want the bond to pass, you need to say, hey, we're going to build A, B, and C. Now, that's something maybe that was in some of the budget information, Ed and Sanjay, you provided, but you need to distill this down in order to be successful, in my opinion. You need to say, we're going to build A, B, and C. And then people are going to go, oh, yeah, that's from that flood. Oh, yeah, we got to support this. So that's just my 2 cents. That's all.
Yeah, thanks, Malcolm. And that actually is in the handout for Proposition 441, which includes stormwater, but it may not have been in whatever the newspaper article was in. So in the handout and on the website for the bond, we do actually have a map of Spruce Wash, because that's where that 26 million would be going towards. We tried not to call out too specifically what those improvements would be, just because we don't know exactly how far that funding will take us. But we do have a map that goes from essentially Linda Vista down past Dortha to Killip School, and then also shows the drainage way down to Route 66. But good comment, and I'll definitely follow up with the bond team to see if they can't provide a little better publicity on that.
Ed, this is Kurt. I got two things, and Rick, Mr. Tatter, maybe you're involved in this one. So two thoughts. First one is, I come from a commercial world, and when I see a 10-year plan where revenues and costs are just flat, we would normally be asked to leave the room because it's like, where is your cost savings plan? You can't. We're never allowed to just run consistent. It's like you've always got to have a way to drop that cost because of profit pressure, which is not. This is a different world, but to that end, how do we demonstrate to the public through this plan that we are not just building, it's the old government thing. Well, I got to spend it on August 31st because I get my new budget or I lose it. That kind of attitude and that kind of thing, I think would just incense the people of Flagstaff. So how do we ensure that's not the case? The second part is, which group is responsible to really go through this with a fine-tooth comb and say, yeah, these are things we absolutely positively need versus, oh man, that'd be nice to have, right? Because this is not the time or place to be doing a lot of nice to have. And this is not an accusational statement. It's just a question. How does that process work? How do we double, triple check that these are all must have for the benefit of our citizens? And is that between the department and Rick's team, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question, Kurt. And I'll try to take it, and Rick, feel free to jump in. We definitely agonized on this. I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of unknowns moving forward, and the biggest unknown that we have is the detention basin clean out. So we have these very large detention basins going in, Killip School being one, Parkway Basins being another, and then obviously that 20-acre parcel on Schultz Creek being extremely large, as well as Francis Short Pond. Essentially Francis Short Pond is acting like its original intent back in 1923. It's acting as a flood control structure. So there's a lot of need moving forward, but we don't know what that need will be. We did get some cost estimates from our JOCs, our job order contractors, which were very eye-opening in terms of what it costs to clean out those basins. So we tried to provide a risk assessment for annual cleanout. What's the risk of a full cleanout being needed of one of those detention basins versus a dry year like 2020 where we won't see anything, and we tried to annualize that cost, and that's where we came up with that $2 million per year, which is frankly quite a bit lower than what the cost estimates were coming in as. And the reason we went with that lower cost was, one, we thought there'd be a very reasonable chance that those watersheds would slowly recover and we'd have capital improvement projects upstream that would start straining out some of that sediment. And also we'd have dry years. So the hope is to annualize those costs, and in those good years, we can roll over that $2 million into essentially the bank, if you will, so that we have a larger fund balance come a really bad year, like a 2021 year, so that we can fully fund the maintenance obligations that we are going to have. The problem with detention and retention, if you don't clean it out and if you don't maintain it, you just lost that function. So unfortunately, it's not a nice to have. It's a necessary thing in the post-fire environment. We absolutely have to clean out those basins if we want them to function. Otherwise, if we do not, and they are full of sediment or water, even if they're retaining, and we have another flood, there's going to be a pretty large newspaper article the next day in terms of what came down the pike, just because we won't have that capacity if we don't do the maintenance. Going to the capital side, that's a lot easier, to be honest, because that we can actually design, we can engineer, we can look at the risk assessment much easier than we can operations and maintenance. And I will say that we took a really fine comb to it, and we'd really tried to take out anything that looked like a nicety. We really tried to make sure that anything that was on there for post-fire all the way to deferred capital from NEMADs and earlier, were things that were absolutely needed for life and safety and weren't just a nuisance flooding issue. But definitely hear your concern. I think it's something we're going to hear a lot of, especially as we go on the road tour. And it's something we will have to be sure to address correctly. So good comments.
I think you can highlight, we can sort of inoculate some of those discussions by getting ahead of them with, here are a real clear, crisp discussion around these are the design philosophies that we had, and that we are safeguarding Flagstaff's money. We are trying to do the ultimate, the things that are exactly necessary and no more. And anyway, you get the gist. I think we'll help ourselves as we go to market, if you will, with this proposal. So it's I've had to do that in several former lives, and I can sit with you one day and help you with that if you want. But anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you have a great comment there. Great questions. And I really appreciate hearing that, to be honest. So we'll try to tighten that up for the roadshow for sure.
I would ask for more questions, but let's try to limit that to 5 minutes because I want to make sure that we have enough time for our discussion. And with Andy and Brad, I think you've forwarded some questions to Andy for discussion. So, but anybody else have anything for Ed, please?
This
John,
is Robert. Oh, I'm sorry.
Ed, I think it's really good that you're holding that $2 million a year for cleaning those retention basins. I've heard all kinds of nasty things about what's going on in Doney Park with their retention basins, basically full of mud and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that is bad publicity, I can tell you, and bad management. It's just poor management. So good planning.
My question was in the retention basin too. So if before you can clean the mud out, you got to get the water out. What do they do when they pump the water out? Not to add to downstream problem. What do they do with that water? How do they handle that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it really depends on the detention basin design. So which particular detention basin we're working with. So in the case of the Schultz basins, I believe you had a question earlier of where we are with that. So Fan Contracting is actually doing a great job. It's 3 basins. 2 of them are mostly mass graded out. We got the phone going.
Okay.
Hey Burke, can you mute yourself because your phone's ringing?
Yeah.
Thanks. So yeah, just a very quick update. So we have those 3 basins at the Schultz Pass, or not Schultz Pass, sorry, at the Schultz Y. 2 of them are mass graded right now. We're working on the 3rd, moving very quickly. Fan Contracting is doing a great job. We should be able to wrap up within a month, both mass grading and fine grading, head walls, concrete, etc. So what we're doing with that particular detention basin is we have 2 outlets. So one would be your seasonal flow, so basically snow melt, small storms, local storms, whatever. And that'd be a 30-inch CMP, so 30-inch corrugated metal pipe. And then we have our outfall, so our actual designed outfall, and that's another 30-inch CMP. And then we have our emergency overflow structure, which will be a weir structure with riprap. And that's for any flow that's above what those 3 basins can take. So essentially you have 3 outlets, one for your nuisance flows or seasonal flows, environmental flows, whatever you want to call it. One that's your main outflow for draining the detention basin so we can actually get down to the sediment to clean it. And then your emergency overflow structure. So the purpose is to drain those within 36 hours. They are detention basins, not retention. So drain them within 36 hours. Obviously, it's going to be a muddy bottom, but hopefully we can get some clear skies in there so we can get loaders, graders, etc. in. And we are surveying in control points. So when we bring in those loaders, graders, etc., there will be GPS control points so they can run with an RTK GPS to get it back to the original grade.
Super. Thank you very much.
So does that mean those retention basins will be fully operational in about 30, 40 days?
They should be operational by this fall, correct?
Super.
Awesome. Thanks.